John is a Christian, a highly educated man, and a university professor. He travels all over the world, giving lectures about how to prevent diseases. There are many other scholars and professors doing the same thing. What makes John different? John is 96 years old. That's right, 96 years old. And at that age, he does all his traveling and gives his lectures. John thinks that he'll retire maybe when he's 100 years old. Seriously.
我是在上海生的1923年，但是我的父亲是从美国到中国来的1918年。蒋介石国民党来的上海1927年。
I'm sorry, I didn't understand anything you just said. You were speaking Chinese?
Yes, that was Chinese. I just said I was born in Shanghai in 1923, but my parents came to China in 1918. And then Chiang Kai-shek, leading the new government, the Kuomintang, came in. They fought right down our street. That was in 1927. That's the first thing I remember. I was maybe 3 or 4 years of age, and the U.S. Marines surrounded our compound. But you know, it's even more complicated than that. My father's mother was born in Copenhagen, but at age 3, their family moved to Schleswig-Holstein. And that was German operated, but one part was mostly Danish people and the other part German. And there she met a Scharfenberg and they got married. So that's where the Scharfenbergs came in. I think my grandmother's maiden name was Wolf. I think she was Jewish. All her friends were Jewish. But they then later came to the United States. And so my family has German, Danish background, as well as we're in China, so we're part Chinese.
So you have a German, Danish, Chinese-American heritage.
That's correct.
You know, Western culture compared to Chinese culture is and has always been very different. Growing up as a little boy in that place, how did you understand God compared to the Asian pagan take on religion?
Well, I was in a very Christian family, and I was a good Bible student. And studying the Chinese Bible even made it more interesting because they have a picture language. So the flood is a picture of a boat with 8 people in it, you know. So that's exciting to see what the Chinese picture Bible means. It helps the Christian belief.
Do you remember any specific moment, perhaps a personal experience or a breaking point with the Lord Jesus Christ that brought you to the place where you made a decision for baptism?
Yes, I think I was more religiously oriented than my 2 brothers. I was strongly excited about the spirit of prophecy. Revelation 12:17 says that last church is going to have a prophet. And I knew I should be going to movies, and that great movie, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, came to town, and all my friends went, and I didn't go. That was one big thing. And then I read what Ellen White said about amusements, all these games and things. I stopped playing all those usual games, even though I was good at chess. I stopped playing all those kind of things. And those are the things that brought me to the decision of baptism.
So you were baptized at a very young age.
Yes, I was baptized in 1937 at the age of 14 in the Great Pacific Ocean there at Hong Kong.
Now, it's worth mentioning that in the 1930s, that was British Hong Kong. Is it possible to compare Imperial China and British Hong Kong of the 1930s to what it is today? Is it possible to do that?
It's possible, but I'll tell you, I was brought up in Shanghai, which was run by the International Settlement controlled by the British. So that was organized similar to Hong Kong, you see. But the Chinese mainland with Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang in charge, you had a lot of freedom. In fact, Chiang Kai-shek's wife was a Sung girl. The Sung sisters were educated in the U.S. at the Wesleyan College. They were Methodists, so they had a Christian background too. But the Chinese had liberty in those days. They could do almost anything they wanted.
Shortly before World War II broke out, John, as a teenager, had a dilemma. Should he study theology or should he study medicine?
I remember Dr. Miller in China was a very famous doctor. He did a lot of surgery, he took out a lot of goiters. But as a boy, I said, why doesn't he give the people iodine so they don't get the goiters? Seemed like prevention made a lot more sense than cure, but it didn't make money, of course.
So what decision did you make finally?
I finally decided, since doctors had more influence than ministers with the people, I should become a medical missionary. I should take medicine instead of being a minister.
Now, do you remember the day that you made your decision? Did you pray about it?
I prayed about it, but it was a whole attitude of prayer every day. For many days, it was a process, not an instant thing.
In the year 1940, you and your parents returned to the United States before the war.
That is correct. My dad lectured on the coming war with Japan, which came a year later. And then I took pre-med in Washington Missionary College, and just over the district line from capital Washington, D.C., and got into medical school. The Army put me through. My classmates were all in the Army overseas, and here I was going through medical school. At the end of medical school, I discovered there's preventive methods in psychiatry. I didn't see much good effect from the work of psychiatrists. There's physical fitness. That's good. But I was interested in religious things, and so I chose to go into nutrition because so many people think of nutrition in a religious concept. So that's what I got into nutrition.
Usually people think about Eastern religions when they think about nutrition.
But, you know, the Catholics, they don't believe in eating meat maybe on Fridays and eat fish. And so there's a lot of Western religion involved in this nutrition too. So that's why I got into this field.
Were there other Bible principles that you also were excited about? For example, did you use Bible principles when searching for your life partner, for your future wife?
Yes, I certainly did. And you know, it's a matter of being in constant prayer, praying unceasingly. Somebody says, how do you do that? Well, I said, you make all your decisions in light of how you believe in God. And so that's what I did. And so it became very important when I was looking for the most beautiful girl in the world. I found her, and I said to myself, she's beautiful, but can somebody that beautiful be spiritual? That was the question in my mind. But we prayed together, and we were enjoying the same things together spiritually. So I thought this was the right pick, and I ended up and found out she was very spiritual.
You spent a wonderful 67 years married to your wife, from your wedding in 1945 until she passed away in 2012. What are some of the principles that you built your marriage upon?
We agreed on two things before we got married. One, we would have morning and evening worship together every day. That's number one. That caused no problem. That was good. Second principle was we would read what Ellen White wrote, The Spirit of Prophecy, and do what it said to do, even though we knew of nobody else doing that. A lot of people, it upset them because they thought we were trying to tell them they should do it. We weren't. We would just want to live this way ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember you mentioning to me that you have children. How many children have you got?
I have two children.
Okay. And I remember you saying something about homeschooling. Is that a decision that your wife, that you made together before you had children, or did that happen as they started going to school?
It happened because we read the Spirit of Prophecy, how they should eat, how they should do this, how they should do that. And going to the regular school system, they couldn't do it that way. And so we decided we must teach them at home to follow our principles. And so that's what we did, even though it was illegal in those days to do it.
Now, your children were growing up in the 1950s. That's 70 years ago. Do you think that homeschooling is still something that is relevant now? Do children still need this?
I think it's still very important. When they're homeschooled, they come up, this group of students is thinking entirely different than that group. They're all having new ideas instead of all of them coming out with exactly the same kind of sheep following the leader.
After World War II, you wanted to return to China to continue the missionary work your parents had started in the 1920s. You wanted to be a medical missionary.
That's correct, I did. And so I went back with my wife. She was pregnant. Baby was due any time. I had OB instruments with me on the plane, and we arrived in Hong Kong. Elder Branson was the division president. He said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I came to be a missionary to China." He said, "Well, we're all leaving," because Mao Zedong had come in and everybody was leaving.
Now, have you got an opinion regarding the differences between Western mentality and Chinese mentality? Is there something that you really like or dislike about Western mentality compared to Chinese mentality and their cultures? Can you tell us something?
Well, you know, they put rice on the graves. And I said, "But the people can't eat the rice. We put flowers on the graves, and the people can't smell the flowers either." So that's very similar, really. But they don't have mental hospitals like we have. That's just normal. You keep them in the home. You keep them with the family. If you make a Chinese man your friend, he's a friend for life, even if you go to jail. So I like the friendship of the Chinese. They're great people.
There are some people who have visited China, even recently, who complain about some of the customs in China, people belching in public or spitting on the street. How could you compare the current culture, the culture today, between the West and China?
Well, you know, their culture's changed quite a bit. They didn't see white people very often, and they called us Yangguizi, that's foreign devils. That's out of mode now. That's not very respectful, so they don't do that anymore. But we were called foreign devils. If not, we were called Dabiza, big noses, because we had bigger noses than they did. And it was kind of interesting to see some of these differences. They did do a lot of spitting on the street, that sort of thing. But today, they're much more like us, much more than they used to be.
In 1949, you were invited to go to South Korea, to Seoul.
That's correct. So I started to work that first day when the war started. The first lady that came to see me said, "I've been pregnant for 12 months. Well, now we read about that in textbooks, but never expect to see it happen. And there is a lady in front of me who had a mummified dead baby inside of her. She needed to have a uterus removed with that dead baby. But that's the day the war started.
Unfortunately, you were not able to stay very long in South Korea, as in 1950, the Korean War broke out. What happened to you and your family at that moment?
Well, we were evacuated. I was on the third from the last plane to leave. The Yak fighters were shooting at us on our way out to the airport. But we got moved to Japan. But my wife and family, we got there before they did, because they got there by boat and we went by plane. And martial law was established there. General MacArthur had us all stay in a certain place. And then I asked to come back to the United States. But the mission treasurer says, "No, you have to go by boat." I said, "When's the next boat?" 6 months from now. But I went down to Pan American and said, "Do you have a plane?" They said, "No, no plane." And then I came out of the Pan American office and saw the manager of Pan American from Seoul. I had delivered his wife by cesarean section. He said, "What's the problem?" I said, "They said have no plane." "Yes," he said, "they do. They have one for their employees." I said, "When's it going?" "Right now." I said, "Can you hold it up till I go get my family from the mission compound and bring them?" "Of course, but hurry." He said, "Hurry." So we got to come home free of charge from this plane that's taking the employees from Pan American back to the United States. We landed in San Francisco at the World Conference, General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, when they were having their meetings. And as soon as I got there, Dr. Shryack, Dean of the School of Medicine at Loma Linda University, invited me to come to Loma Linda and teach physical diagnosis to the medical students. So I got a job right away as soon as I came home.
Oh, that's amazing. But all being said, do you ever regret that you became a medical doctor instead of becoming a minister and preaching the Word of God?
Well, I had an opportunity at an airplane to deliver a baby who later became an Adventist minister, president of a conference, and I had so many exciting things. The General Conference, I was in the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. They sent me all over the world, so I traveled everywhere. I had important meetings all over the world. So it was a wonderful time. I enjoyed working to bring people into the church. I had brought many people into the church, even though I was not a minister.
Between 1953 and 1955, you served in the United States Army. Were your Christian beliefs and convictions in line with your service there? Were you able to serve and still hold on to your convictions?
Yes. Of course, it wasn't training to kill. When we were there, we were trained to heal. That was our job, was to do the healing, you know. So there was no problem in this aspect of the military. We could serve as Christians very nicely in the military.
Mm-hmm. During your military service, you were sent to Taiwan as a military advisor in 1954. Of course, nobody knew that you spoke Chinese.
No, that's right. I didn't tell anybody. And I ate with the Chinese every day in the military. They didn't know I spoke Chinese. And this was a lot of fun. So the intelligence service of the U.S. Army listened to my advice. They would ask me, how long do you think this company would hold up in a war? And I said, maybe 1 or 2 days. And I knew the Chinese language pretty well, and so I knew what they were talking about. And they had the sick right in the companies. They should have had them back in a hospital somewhere, not there with the active duty people. And so I helped one particular man, a major, helped him a lot to get all his sick out of his company. And so they gave me award, special honorary award, commendation from the Chinese Army because I managed to get all the sick out of his company back into the hospitals.
There are many doctors, nurses, and other medical workers today who are asking themselves, how can I witness? How can I share my faith when I'm at work? Have you got any experiences or any recommendations for these Christian people?
I think you need to do your work well and faithfully. I remember our hospital, Fort Ord in the Army. We had 250 beds. Because of all the pneumonia cases, it went up to 700. And a lot of the doctors didn't want to work too hard, so they didn't want to empty the bed and have a new patient. It took a lot more time to work up the new patient. I was very honest. I took my patients when they got well, I sent them out. And a lot of the people got sick and came back again. And they were sure it was mine because I was sending them out so fast. It was not mine. I just done a good job, honest job, and got the people well out of there. It was the other doctors whose patients came back, not mine. But with tuberculosis, for example, I was really able to cut down the TB rate in our county tremendously. They made me an advisor to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, because we were doing such a good job. Such a good job that we closed down our TB unit. It's just tremendous what happened. But they all looked up to me. I became the county health officer as a result because I was doing a good job. And then they begin to think about your religion. If they see us doing a good job, they think our religion must be good too.
In the 1960s, you were living and working in San Bernardino, California. And at that time, there was a huge problem with tuberculosis. We can say that, in fact, you were fighting a battle against this disease. What were the so-called weapons that you were using in the front lines to combat this illness? Were there vaccinations available at that time in the United States?
What happens was, in our country, we use the PPD skin test to see if somebody's affected. We didn't use BCG at birth like you did over here, because you had much more here than we did. So we had only a few cases relative to what you had.
In Europe, you mean?
Yes.
In Europe.
So what we did was do skin tests. Then if somebody turns positive, we know somebody that he's contacted has TB. Let's find out who it is. And so we worked hard at that. And now our TB rate is down beautifully. We closed our TB unit in our hospital because we did such a good job of treating the people. The doctor was a Loma Linda graduate who was treating the people. And I said, you're having a little problem. You're giving the people medicines that the bugs are already resistant to. Let's do chemical studies to see what medicines they are not resistant to. When we started doing that, the cases got well and they got out of there. So we did a beautiful job of it, and now our case rate is really down low. We expect maybe by the year 2030, 10 more years, we will have 0 cases of tuberculosis in our county.
There are many, many diseases in our world today, and there are thousands and thousands of people dying of these diseases every day. As a result, some say that from all of this suffering and sickness and sadness, that it's impossible that there would be a God, that God doesn't exist. What would you say as an answer to those people?
I think if you read the Bible carefully, you'll know there's a great controversy going on between God and Satan. Satan is the one who's causing the people not to make the right decisions. Let me give you an example of that. Cardiovascular disease is the main killer in the industrialized nations. It kills more people than the next 5 leading causes of death combined. Now we know that if you avoid 7 risk factors, you can decrease the risk of heart attack and stroke 80%. The risk of diabetes type 2, 88%. What are the 7 risk factors? Don't smoke, don't drink alcohol. Number 3, inactivity. We need to exercise every day. Number 4, keep our weight down where it should be. Number 5, less meat, more vegetarian type diet. Then they added 2 more. High blood pressure, high blood cholesterol. But if you do the first 5, you're not apt to have high blood pressure or high blood cholesterol. But the people are not making the right decisions. We know this scientifically, but how do you persuade people to change? That's our problem. If they would live right, as God tells us to, he who does not work should not eat. The Bible says so. We need to exercise. Work in those days meant exercise. We need to work. The original diet was a vegetarian diet. The diet in heaven will be a vegetarian diet. So the right diet, exercise, and these things are very important, and we can avoid most of these diseases.
In the 1970s, you worked at Loma Linda University in California. And again, the work you did there was teaching people about how to prevent disease. There are many people who are still very ill. Is it really so difficult to prevent diseases, or is it just that people don't care?
I think it's mostly people don't care. And I think that's where the church has a responsibility. If they think there's a moral basis for doing what's right, they're more apt to do it. I think the church leadership should be helping people to see this as a moral problem. It's not just a physical problem. We need to do what's right. And if you're in a group setting, a group is trying to change, you're more apt to get the change than if one person's trying to do it by himself. So we should try in all the health clubs, all the church setting, to have a group changes.
I remember from looking in my notes that you've spent a large portion of your life living in one of the so-called blue zones. Now, if we were to check that on the internet, what a blue zone is, we would find that it's a place where people have exceptional longevity. One of those places being where you lived for a long time, Loma Linda, California. What do you think it is about these blue zones, these places, that make them so exceptional?
Well, at Loma Linda, it's the kind of people who live there. There's so many Seventh-day Adventists there, so many who are vegetarians, to make all the difference in longevity. For example, Gary Fraser, a New Zealand doctor, studied the general population and compared those to the Adventist vegetarians. For the men, 19.5% in the general population lived to be 85 or older. But for the Seventh-day Adventist vegetarian men, it was a lot more than that. It was 48.6%. Now, the women live longer than men. We haven't figured out yet why scientifically. But for the general population, 39.3% of the women live to be 85 or older. But for the Adventist vegetarian women, 60.1% live to be longer. This is why in the year 2015, the nutritional panel that's advising the U.S. government said, tell everybody that the vegetarian diet is an optimum diet along with the Mediterranean diet. So now vegetarianism has become quite popular.
So you were living in California until 2012. And then what happened?
Well, my wife died that year.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
So we had already planned in advance what I was to do after she was gone. I'm a social person. She knows I need to be around people. She knows I like to do health education. So we had agreed that I would probably come to Europe where I had contacts and do health education.
I had the privilege to coordinate John's lectures he had in the Czech Republic. I was always amazed at his enthusiasm, energy, and sense of humor. In his lifestyle, John followed the biblical principles, Ellen G. White instructions of healthy living, as well as the scientific discoveries since his young age. For more than 70 years, he had been eating just twice a day, having no bite between meals. His favorite exercise was chopping wood, farm work, and walking. All this brought many benefits, not only to him, but also to his family, which he led to follow the same principles.
I can hardly believe the numbers I have here. The year 2013, Slovakia, Serbia, the Czech Republic, Poland, 153 days, 162 lectures.
Yes, that's correct. That's what it was.
In 2014, another European tour, 180 lectures in 118 days. This is impossible even for a young person.
Yeah, that you have the figures right. But Abraham was 99 when he was promised by the Lord that he'd be the father of many nations. So I'm thinking of retiring when I'm 100, but that might change. You know, I'm not sure yet. But right now, I'm planning to retire when I'm 100. It doesn't matter how long or short your earthly life is. The only important thing is whether or not you give your life to Jesus Christ. When speaking about him, his earthly life was about 1/3 of mine in length, but he completely changed the world. You can forget about me tomorrow, and it will be okay. But never forget about Jesus. He is the only one who conquered death, and he promised to save all those who accept him as their Lord and Savior. Thus saith the Lord, if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands, I will give you a long life.